The red-haired girl who once refused the whole world just to live true to herself. Paris, 1994. A blazing runway for Jean-Paul Gaultier. Among dozens of models in perfectly pleated dresses, one girl walked out as if she were bending the entire room. Fiery red hair, a shining nose ring, Doc Martens boots overpowering even the catwalk lights. Sibyl Buck was like no one else. She didn't try to be sexy. She didn't care to please the cameras. And most of all, she refused to follow any of fashion's sacred rules of the 90s. She walked, she laughed, she stuck her tongue out at photographers as if declaring to the world, "I didn't come here to play a role, I came here as myself." At a time when models were chosen for perfect symmetry, flawless skin, and a cold, statue-like walk, Sibyl Buck stepped out as a cultural undercurrent, wild, free, layered with depth, and impossible to predict. She embodied grunge on the runway, unpolished, unapologetic, never performing for anyone's gaze. A living icon at the crossroads of fashion, rock, punk, and radical individuality. But at her peak, she disappeared. No accident, no scandal, no farewell. She simply vanished, like a guitar riff cut short at its loudest crescendo. 2 decades later, the world saw a silver-haired woman with a meditative presence walking the runway for Miu Miu as the audience fell into stunned applause. And in that silence, every gaze quietly whispered the same name. Sibyl Buck had returned. But she never truly belonged anywhere. Sibyl Buck was born on May 27, 1972, in Versailles, France, where the Grand Palace stands tall in sunlight and centuries of history. Yet only a few weeks later, her family moved to Virginia, USA. Her father had once taught at an American school in Paris, a quiet detour that carried her from heritage into a far simpler life. Her childhood held no glamour. Instead, it was framed by skateboards, punk music, and fashion magazines that became her first window into another world. She attended Cambridge Rindge and Latin School, where raw grunge style began to take root. Flannel shirts, Doc Martens, multiple piercings, each a small declaration of identity. At 20, she moved to Paris with the intention of studying art, a fleeting impulse. During her very first catwalk, an agency director advised her to change in order to look more natural. She bleached her hair blonde, then defiantly dyed it back with Manic Panic Pillar Box Red, a fiery rebellion that cost her a $20,000 Nina Ricci job. But by holding firm to her own style, she earned the embrace of designers like Jean-Paul Gaultier, YSL, and Alexander McQueen. Her blazing red hair, fused with punk energy, made her not only the grunge queen of the runway, but also an aesthetic symbol of resistance. "I'm not trying to be a model. I'm just living with what I find most beautiful." The standout piercings, nose, tongue, even chest, along with her fearless presence, set the fashion world ablaze in rebellion. She didn't just wear the attitude. She was the statement that the industry could never define her. When Sibyl first stepped onto Jean-Paul Gaultier's runway, every gaze froze, not because of an extravagant gown, nor because she was a new face being promoted, but because she looked like no one who had ever appeared there before. Her hair blazed red like fire, her nose ring gleamed, and her piercing stare struck like a declaration. "I didn't come here to be liked. I came to make people question their definition of beauty." In a world where models were trained to walk the same, look the same, behave the same, Sibyl didn't walk. She hurled herself down the runway like a deliberate collision. Every step carried raw, unpolished energy. No soundtrack could keep up. And one by one, the biggest names in fashion, Gaultier, McQueen, Galliano, Yves Saint Laurent, nodded in recognition. Not because she fit in, but because she could never be made to. To Alexander McQueen, She was a haunting specter drifting through his darkly beautiful designs. To Galliano, she was mischief incarnate in a world that took itself too seriously. To YSL, she was the necessary rupture, the slash across the Maison's classical elegance. No one corrected Sibyl. They reshaped entire shows to fit her. She didn't smile the way a model was supposed to smile. She stuck out her tongue on the runway, once, then twice, and each time the audience could only laugh in disbelief. Fashion magazines began calling her the grunge goddess, a rebel deity draped in couture. But behind that defiance lay a quiet mind, an artist who always knew she didn't belong to the spotlight. She knew that everything she could achieve, she would eventually give up, because she had never truly desired it. She didn't need the title of supermodel. Instead, she chose to become a vivid memory in runway history, something that couldn't be labeled, but could never be forgotten. Sibyl didn't walk the catwalk as part of a show. She made the stage revolve around her. And then, just as the peak drew near, when every designer wanted her, when magazine covers multiplied, she was already preparing to disappear. No scandal, no rejection, no replacement. Simply, she chose to stop. In 1997, at just 25 years old, Sibyl Buck walked away from the fashion industry. No promise of return, no interview to explain, no farewell feature in any major magazine. She simply disappeared, the same way she had arrived, suddenly, without asking permission. While her peers were signing million-dollar contracts, competing for opening slots at the biggest shows, Sibyl quietly left Paris. She left the lights, the cameras, the title of grunge muse that the media had pinned on her. There was no downfall, no scandal, no breakdown. She had simply had enough. When asked years later about that decision, her answer was barely a whisper. I never thought I belonged there forever. Leaving the runway, Sibyl returned to the first thing that had ever made her feel truly herself: music. She played bass for underground bands like Champions of Sound and the Lonely Astronauts with artist Joseph Arthur, and even toured with the rock band Bush in 2012, where Gavin Rossdale once remarked, "She plays bass as if it's her natural breath." Music didn't ask her to wear makeup. It didn't ask her to strut. It didn't ask her to maintain an image. It only asked for honesty. And that was exactly what she had been searching for. Not long after, she became a mother. She named her daughter Puma Rose. And for nearly 15 years, she vanished almost entirely from the fashion radar. People said she lived in Topanga Canyon, an artists' and yogis community tucked away in the California wilderness. There, no one called her a legendary model. They called her Sibyl, the yoga teacher who plays music on Friday afternoons. Those who met her later often described her as a kind of punk monk, carrying both a deep inner strength and a rebellious edge that had never been extinguished, like fire sealed inside a glass bottle, not blazing, but always burning. In one rare interview, when asked about her time at fashion's peak, she simply smiled and said, "Modeling was just a small part. I had a whole life left to live." In 2022, nearly 25 years after Sibyl Buck left the runway, something no one expected happened. On the catwalk of Miu Miu, where young, slender, perfectly polished faces marched out with the haughty grace of high fashion, Sibyl appeared. Her hair was no longer fiery red. The features once described as rebellious now seemed serene. But her presence was unchanged, if anything, deeper. Sibyl didn't try to make herself young again. She let age stay on her face and let her aura lead the way. And with just a single walk, the entire room seemed spellbound. Sibyl Buck is back, and she never needed permission to be here. She did not appear often, but after that moment, houses like The Row, Vivienne Westwood, Tom Brown, all invited her in turn. Not because of her past fame, but because she carried something fashion craved more than ever: truth. No retouching, no Botox, not a symbol of the new generation. Sibyl stood for those who had walked before, who had lived authentically, who had dared to disappear. Like a low note resonating in the middle of an electronic song, not loud, but powerful enough to make you stop. In an interview with Of the Minute, Sibyl explained that her return wasn't about money, but about her daughter, Puma Rose Buck, who was beginning her own modeling career. Sibyl wanted her daughter to see that age does not measure value, and a career is not always a straight line. I didn't come back to remake myself. I came back so my daughter could see. There are paths in this industry that don't exist on the map. And in truth, Puma has done what few could, entering fashion with ease, inheriting her mother's presence without retracing her mother's steps. Thanks to Sibyl, a new generation is being raised not on the spirit of fame, but on the spirit of inner freedom. Sibyl Buck's legacy is not in the number of shows she walked, not in the campaigns she booked, not even in her Vogue covers. It lies in this: she dared to arrive, dared to leave, and dared to live a life fashion had not scripted for her. And when she returned, she didn't step out as a revived legend. She stepped out as a woman, once rebellious, once vanished, and now quiet enough to make others truly listen. Sibyl Buck never tried to become an icon. She never chased the title of supermodel, never sought a place on the 50 most beautiful faces lists, and never published a memoir recounting a glorious past. Yet, perhaps it is precisely because of that, she became one of the most unforgettable names of the 90s modeling generation. In an industry built on ranking and categorizing, Sibyl was the blank space between the lines. She didn't rebel with fiery statements in the press. She rebelled simply by existing and disappearing at the right time. People often talk about those who are famous, but in truth, we remember those who dared to live as if no one was watching. And if there is one thing that sets Sibyl Buck apart, it is this: she never lived for the spotlight. She lived for her own truth. From Versailles to Virginia, from Paris to Topanga Canyon, from the fashion stage to the recording studio, from model to mother, from the low hum of a bass guitar to the steady breath in a yoga room, Sibyl Buck is proof of a life that isn't linear, but always centered on one thing: being herself, no matter what the world demanded. And if tomorrow she were to vanish once more, perhaps no one would be surprised. Because Sibyl never truly belonged anywhere, yet wherever freedom is sought, she is there.